My name's Andrew Brooks. Welcome to the Doherty Institute Virtual Open Day. I'm the Deputy Director of the Institute. I'm the head of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, which is largely housed in Doherty. Before we go too much further, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which the university stands. That's the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples, the Yorta Yorta Nation and the Dja Wurrung people, and pay respects to the elders past and present. How am I going forward here? So here we go. Just for way of introduction to the Doherty Institute, it's a joint venture between the University of Melbourne and the Royal Melbourne Hospital. It opened in 2014. The building required a pretty big chunk of money stumped up by the state government, the Commonwealth and the university. And it sits within a really dynamic Parkville precinct. What's interesting about it, it's almost entirely focused on the study of infection and immunity. And it's home to over 700 scientists, educators, clinicians, public health experts. And it's quite distinct from most institutes around the place, around the traps here, because it really spans both basic research through to translational research, through clinical trials, through public health diagnostics, through to education, both in terms of university students, but also regional education and training and skilling, and then right into the clinical sphere and clinical impact. So it's really quite a diverse set of characters that work here, and a really diverse and rich environment, which allows us to address questions that are not so readily addressed by sort of really much more focused, limited institutes. As you would know, the institute's named after Professor Peter Doherty. He's the Nobel Prize winner in 1996 for discovering essentially the mechanism of T-cell recognition. So basically the nature of cellular immune defenses. He's still based at the Doherty, well, up until this year. Like many of us, he's not on site that often anymore, but he's got a long history in research, particularly in the last decade or so into respiratory viruses, in particular flu. So he's quite knowledgeable about the current pandemic, being an expert in respiratory viruses and immune responses to those. So I'm sure many of you have heard him either on the airways or on the Twitter feed, which was quite often quite amusing. And also you can catch up with often his latest thoughts on the Doherty website if you're interested. The inaugural director of the Doherty Institute is Professor Sharon Lewin. She's an infectious diseases physician. She's a clinician researcher as well as a basic scientist. She's published over 250 papers. She's a world authority on HIV in particular. And, but again, more recently, you would have seen her really become an authority on SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, and is really one of the leading figures in the country in terms of providing advice and expert opinion. Most recently, being appointed to the Victorian Code Advisory Group, which provides advice to the Victorian Treasurer. The Institute itself, it's got a pretty simple focus, which is to improve health globally through discovery, prevention, and cure of infectious diseases. As I said, we're really focused on infectious diseases, but not strictly limited to that. You will find people here work on things outside that sphere of influence as well. The Institute is actually, as I said, originally it was a joint venture, and that means it's a partnership between two bodies, which is the Royal Melbourne Hospital and the University of Melbourne. As students, you're probably much more familiar with the University of Melbourne, but the Royal Melbourne Hospital, the contributors in that space are probably four major groups. One is the Victorian Infectious Diseases Reference Lab. There, again, really became quite prominent in our current situation because this lab was the first lab to isolate and cultivate SARS coronavirus 2 outside of China. So that enabled us to start doing some research and some public health measures, get into public health measures really quickly. They quickly distributed that virus across numerous labs across the world, which again really was helpful in further promoting and validating diagnostic approaches and supercharging some research into the virus. Also sitting under the umbrella of this VIDRL, Victorian Infectious Disease Reference Lab, is a WHO Centre of Research and Reference in Influenza. So this group is really expert in influenza virology, again, looking at the distribution and the sequences of influenza moving across the world. They provide advice about vaccine formulation. One of only a very, very few centres in the world that do this. And then there are two more clinically, really clinically focused departments or branch or parts of the Royal Melbourne Hospital here, which are the Victorian Infectious Disease Service, who deal with infectious diseases and clinical manifestations of infectious disease, and VICNIS, which is really focused around hospital-acquired infections. The University of Melbourne side, there are really three departments that are really housed within the Doherty Institute. The Department of Microbiology and Immunology, of which I'm the head, which is home to this thing called the Microbiological Diagnostic Unit. Again, this unit was really prominent in the recent, in our current situation. This is where all the genomic data was acquired, tracking the SARS-CoV-2 outbreaks. The Doherty department is also is another unit. It's a smaller department, and then two locations, essentially the Department of Medicine, one at Royal Melbourne Hospital itself, and then another out at Austin Health. I'll talk about these departments a little bit more in a second. In terms of the way we undergo or arrange our work, the Institute has really four broad themes: one of immunology, the second around antimicrobial resistance and healthcare associated infections, a third around viral infectious diseases, and then a sort of a more broad-based sweep of work that focuses on host pathogen interactions. But these are big areas and they can be looked at in a variety of different ways, and we sort of use a whole myriad of different lenses to examine things in these themes. So we might be using discovery research, we might be looking at the public health implications of our work in this space, we might be trying to translate this and do really clinical research. There's also an international health aspect of these programs. Education and professional development is really core to what we do, and I really want to emphasize how important education is to us in terms of giving you really good, solid grounding in understanding your particular field that you move into. We're really interested in making sure that the work that we do addresses Indigenous health. And again, genomics is a core technology which is now spanning really across all these themes, which is really enabling or a cross-cutting technology which is really enhancing work in each of these disciplines or themes. In terms of the Institute, in terms of its numbers, we have well over 45 research groups. We would have over 120 PhD students across multiple departments, and greater than $40 million come into the Institute each year in terms of competitive grant funding, 700 staff or more. And in terms of infrastructure, lots of really high-end infrastructure ranging from microscopes through to electron microscopes through to imaging facilities, as well as things like the only PC4 lab which is dedicated to diagnostics in the country. So this is a laboratory where you would learn about diagnosing Ebola, or you would diagnose people with Ebola or other really high pathogen, high containment pathogens. So as a student, you're more likely to be associated more directly through one of the teaching departments. So there are, as I said, there are essentially three of these. There's the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, which I'm the head. And so this is, again, a really large university department. It's got major strengths in immunology. It itself has about a bit over 100 PhD students, and a really long history in training students through honours, through masters, and through PhDs into turning them into really excellent research scientists. The Doherty department here is a more recent department. It's been established to really support cross-institutional collaborations, particularly with the hospital and the institute and the university, and it's got a focus on clinical and translational research. And then the third here is the Department of Medicine, be it at the RMH or at the Austin. Again, this is home to people who often have joint appointments with both the hospital and the university. So there's a whole lot of people here with clinical appointments. And the research is quite mixed in that sort of ranges from basic research through to probably a tendency to be more clinical in its nature and or health service based. But clearly they also offer really good training in PhD students and student supervision. And so what we're here today to talk about is really what happens now, or what are the opportunities ahead of you. This sort of slide summarizes the way we would see some of those pathways. So I'm guessing most of you are sort of this space here. They're just completing a Bachelor of Biomedicine or Bachelor of Science. And so if you want to go on and do a medical degree, that's possible. If you want to go on and move into something that's a bit more population-based, there are some new pathways that are floating around. So this is sort of epidemiology and public health. But the majority of us probably here to talk about coming through the sort of microbiology and immunology pathways, which will give you access to honours degrees in microimmunology or pathology, or 2 years master's degrees in the department. And ultimately, what we're hoping is that many of you will come through and end up doing your PhD. I think that's it for me. What you'll hear about in the rest of the time here is we'll hear some presentations from both students about what the experience is like to study and work in this environment. And personally, I think it's a really exciting place to be, particularly at this point in time. And you'll also, but I'm going to turn it over in the short term to Professor Scott Miller, who's is a laboratory head in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, and he's also the Department Honours and Masters Coordinator. So with that, I'll try and stop sharing my screen and hand it to Scott.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, is that better? Welcome everyone. So thank you, Andrew, for giving a bit of an overview of the Institute. And what I hope to do now for everyone who's listening is to give a bit of an overview of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. As Andrew mentioned, the department is located within the Institute, and as students coming in to do research projects, the majority of students that come in to do honours and masters and PhD do so by enrolling in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. Some students do come through pathology or the Department of Medicine or population health. So there are some projects on offer that you might enroll through those departments, but the majority of research projects from honours through PhD tend to go through our department, and so I'll focus most of the information on the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. Assuming my cursor works. So Andrew gave a bit of an overview of the Institute, and many of the numbers that he mentioned are made up by numbers of people and labs and so forth from the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. So for instance, within the department, there's 43 research groups and over 300 staff. And probably most interestingly for yourselves, there's a large number of students, including over 100 PhD students, and this year in particular, over 20 masters and honours students. So quite a substantial number of students enrolled in the department. So a really large and really vibrant student community for those doing research. So actually a really exciting place to be generally, but then of course, an even more exciting place to be at the moment with much of the leading COVID-19 work that's happening in the country being done actually within the Doherty Institute, and a lot of it within the department as well. For some reason I can't advance my slides. Sorry, bear with me for a second. Okay, sorry about that. So now, as Andrew mentioned, there's a number of components to the department, and one of which is the microbiological diagnostic unit. But in addition to that, there are a number of key facilities that enable our research, including a media unit and many state-of-the-art, both PC2 and PC3 laboratories. The PC4 laboratories is not in the department per se, but we have very advanced infrastructure in flow cytometry and imaging, including confocal and intravital imaging, as well as a large bioresources facility and the advanced microbial genomics facility. So a broad range of facilities that support our research areas. And this is sort of just a flavor of some of the research areas, and you'll see how broad the type of projects there are that are on offer once you go and check out the project database that I'll show you a link to a little bit later on the Doherty website. We've got 100 or so projects on offer for students from various levels, and they cover a very broad range of topics from microbiology, including bacterial pathogenesis and genomics and antibiotic resistance, and molecular virology and viral vaccinology, and considerable amounts of immunology research, both anti-pathogen immunity, looking at both innate and adaptive immune responses, many people working on T and B cells, antigen-presenting cells, autoimmunity, vaccine design, and so forth. So very broad areas of vaccinology, immunology, microbiology, and virology. And if you're interested and you're not really sure what you're going to be doing next year, what you're interested in, then hopefully some of the information we'll give you today will help you make some of those decisions. Because if you're asking yourself, why would I pick a particular department over one or another, then if you're doing honours or masters or ultimately a PhD in any department, then in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, you really be aiming to extend your knowledge in that research area. Whether you be focused more on microbiology or immunology or virology, you will extend your knowledge in this area. But in addition to this, what you'll be learning in particular is to enhance your ability to find and assess scientific information. We teach you how to think about science and how to think as a scientist or a researcher. And it's very important to delve into this area. And that's what a major part of the coursework is, for instance, in the honours and the master's year. You'll be learning to develop skills in communication, how to talk to your peers and also to the public. And you'll also be learning how to perform the research, real research, not structured research as you would have done so far in third year, but real experiments that will fail sometimes, but you'll be doing it alongside senior and researchers and other students in the department as you perform your honours or master's year. And so what you'll pick up, if, for instance, if you do an honours year, by the end of that year, you'll realise what it's like to be part of a research team. Particularly some of the labs are very large and dynamic, and it can be a lot of fun and very rewarding to be part of a team. And over time, you'll become the expert in your area. You may know very little about it at the beginning, but you'll spend all of your time thinking about your own question and reading about your own area. And you'll very quickly become one of the world's experts in your particular question. But of course, you'll also learn, very importantly, how to do basic things like manage your time and think critically about what you're doing, as well as work independently. You won't rely upon your supervisor or anyone else structuring your day. You'll quickly learn how to structure your own time and work as an independent scientist, as well as working as a team at the same time. And many people often consider what are the options if they do honours or masters, or also if they continue on to do PhD, what are the career options? Well, they're actually surprisingly broad. I mean, if you've completed an honours year or a master's year, you can obviously do a PhD. Other students do so in order to move forward in a postgraduate course such as medicine. Others would like to continue to work in research laboratories, but not necessarily do a PhD or run their own laboratory, and there's many research assistant jobs and other technical jobs that are available once you've done an honours or a master's year. And then of course there's plenty of work, especially lately, in clinical laboratories and clinical trials, and also in industry. Many students move across to industry to do research, or in sales and marketing, or even in project management. And other students have very successfully, from the skills they've learnt in the department, gone on into careers in finance or insurance or government. And so just to give you a sort of an overview of the structure of honours versus masters, if you're not really familiar with it yet, if you're coming in from a Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Biomedicine, then honours is obviously a one-year course, and importantly, it's an undergraduate course. You'll do 75 credit points worth of research project, and the other 25 points that make up the rest of the year will be discipline-specific coursework. You'll start and end at the same time with another cohort of students and get to know them, and they might be in different labs, but you'll do all the coursework together. The potential downside, I guess, to doing an honours course is that it's less recognised overseas. And so therefore, if you're considering on going overseas after that year in order to do something, it may not be recognised as an important step in your career as much as a master's is. And if you're considering to do PhD, then your honours score plus your third year WAM counts towards your PhD entry score. Masters, on the other hand, is obviously a 2-year course, and it's also a postgraduate course, not an undergraduate course. You'll do 75 points of subjects and 125 points of research over those 2 years. That obviously gives you more time to do research, so you do a more substantial research project, but there's limited numbers of Commonwealth supported places, so that's potentially a downside. And I'm not sure if it's a positive or a negative or anything, but if you're considering doing a PhD, then the score required to get into PhD counts entirely on your master's, no longer on your undergraduate score. So the overall honours structure is 125, hang on, so this is the wrong one, sorry. It's 75 points of research. 55% of that is a thesis that you will write, and then there will be a mark from your supervisor and an oral examination at the end of the year. And you will do a 25% coursework component, which consists of 3 units, which cover various areas of bacteriology and immunology and virology, as well as statistics, giving you a broad basis of understanding of the areas that are worked on within the department. The assessment of these coursework subjects varies from oral presentations to creating a poster to writing an essay. So it really gives you a broad baseline of different ways of communicating and thinking about science. A Master's of Biomedical Science course structure is, as mentioned, 125 points of research. And then amongst the 75 points of coursework that you do, you'll be doing a 12.5 point subject, which is Introduction to Biomedical Research. And then you'll be choosing from a wide range of different discipline subjects, depending on your interests, as well as some professional skills subjects. So you can pick and choose your coursework to make up the 75 points across quite a broad range of things, both within and outside the department. And for both honours and masters, you'll be doing a proper research project. Obviously it's longer for masters, but the basis behind it is the same. You'll have a research question and hypothesis. You'll be required to, with your supervisor, design and carry out experiments, and then analyze the data, interpret what it means, and do more experiments to find out the answer to your question. It of course never goes as smoothly as one would hope, and you might repeat things a few times, but it's really an exciting process of discovery and finding out real answers to things that we haven't known before. So both for honours and masters, you have to write a thesis. The length of the thesis is a bit longer for masters, but essentially it's the same structure. You'll be writing an abstract, a background or literature review, materials and methods, results and discussion. So it's a substantial document, and people tend to take a month or two to write that up towards the end of their course. So for honours, the timeline is beginning in February and ending in November in a normal year. It's a bit delayed this year for the students. Have had a very different year, but that's where it normally is. We do most of the coursework in our department for honours right at the beginning of the year. You'll do some project talks and submit a literature review towards the middle of the year, and then finishing up, submitting your thesis and doing an exam at the end of the year. So it's quite a short year all up, but you do get an awful lot done. So the really important bits are, if you're considering to do honours or masters, you need to do a few things, and one of the most important things is to find a project. So on the Doherty website, the link is here, but it's easy to find if you go to the Doherty website and click on education, and then there's a drop down and you can click on projects, as well as a variety of other really useful information. And you can search through the projects by a number of keywords and topic and things like that. And as I said, there's 100 or more projects to choose from. But what's really critical for any students, if you're interested in a project, then you must talk to the supervisors. No supervisor will ever select a student without having spoken to them. So it's critical that you reach out to the supervisors, send them your CV, send them your results, and then tell them about yourself and what you're interested in. If you're really keen on a project, you can also ask to talk to other members of the lab if you would really like to see what it's all about. There's also obviously plenty of general information on the faculty webpage about what's on offer and how you enroll. That's definitely important to check out. So for applications for honours, you need to apply initially, go through the application process by the end of October. You'll then need to choose your projects, your top preferences, up to 4 of them. And this needs to be done by middle of November, the November 13th, and entered in the Sonia system. And you'll then be ranked based on your WAM. You need at least 65 for entry, but it is of course a competitive process. So the better your WAM, the higher in the list you will fall, and the more likelihood that you'll get the project that you're interested in. So once all the ranking is done, the preference is sent to departments, and then there's selection process, and then you'll find out whether you got project, your top choice, or another choice in your project. Now, if you're really interested in microbiology or immunology or other research areas in that vein, we always recommend that you put at least your top preferences from the department to ensure that you end up in the department. The offers, once all the selections have been made, the offers will be made at the end of December. That's for round 1. There are subsequent rounds for those that maybe miss out on a project for one reason or another. And then you can apply for round 2, closing in middle of January, and for selection and outcomes in early February. And of course, for next year, honours will begin on February 15th. Masters is similar but slightly different. There's application closing dates for semester 1, being a February start at the 30th of November. But you can also start mid-year, a July start, and the applications for that close on the 31st of May. Similar to honours, you'll need to meet the minimum entry requirements of at least a WAM of 65 or greater, and additionally it's competitive as well, like honours. The important process is to apply, and then once you've been granted the ability to enter, then you need to look for projects and contact potential supervisors in the same way that we do for honours, and then enter your project. Once you've made an agreement with the supervisor that they would like to take you, you enter that into Sonia, and then the process goes ahead from there. If you're interested in masters, there's more information in a session coming up on Monday the 14th at 4 p.m. That's a faculty master's session. And so if you want to get more detailed information about masters, not specifically for our department, but in general, then by all means go and register for this session that's happening on Monday the 14th. And so that is essentially me, and that's a summary of the department and the process of enrolling. And I think if there's any questions, we can maybe start to answer some of them now, although I'll stress that if there's too many, we will then take more at the end.
We might give Rachel Zhang, before we get to questions, she was going to talk a little bit about the experience she had as a recent honours graduate. So I think students are very interested to hear about how it is for a student going through the department, how tough. It's got a lot of people talk about it, but Rachel was a very successful student, has now graduated last year. We have a different experience from our students this year with shutdown, but Rachel has hopefully a more typical experience that she can share.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Damien. So hi, everyone. My name's Rachel. I actually graduated the year before last year, so in 2008, and I was an honours student in the Heath Lab. So just basically what Damien said, today I've just been asked to talk a little bit about what it was like to be an honours student at Doherty. And I've just chucked my email down there if anyone wants to reach out, and I'm always happy to chat. So essentially, I just think straight off the bat, if anyone's on the fence about doing honours, I would highly, highly recommend it. It was honestly one of the best years and experiences of my life. And don't get me wrong, it is a lot of work and there are a lot of long hours, but by the end of it, your project is your project. You become so invested and passionate about it that those long hours in the lab don't really seem that taxing anymore. And at the same time, the beauty about honours is that it's one of those years where you really get to dictate how much time you want to commit to it. And I think one thing that Prof. Purcell has just mentioned to me was just that a lot of third year students are sort of feeling a bit anxious about the level of lab skills that you require for honours. And I think I read one of the questions in the chat as well. Essentially, all I can say is please don't stress about not having that much lab exposure, especially during COVID times. I'm sure you all have a lot of things on your plate, such as exams and the pains of online learning, which I'm also going through. So I don't want you to be worried about this because you actually do most of your learning within the first 4 months of being in the lab. And it's fantastic how fast you pick things up because it's so immersive. You're in there day in and day out. And at the same time, it's more than okay to not know how to do things. I think if you ask my supervisor, I was a bit of a mess at the start. I was dropping things all over the place. But again, I had an amazing supervisor, Dr. Beatty, as well as a very super supportive lab group, which really makes this entire experience that much more special and easier. And I think that's what honours at Doherty is all about. It's about having these mentors guiding you through and fostering good science for the future. And so speaking of science, I thought I might just break up this didactic talk a little bit and show you a bit of the work that I did throughout my honours. So my project mainly focused on the skin and these sort of special CD4 T cells in the context of malaria. And so this is, first up, is one of my favorite images that I took that I actually included into my thesis. And essentially what you have over here is these little sort of red dots that are our CD4 T cells and our green dots over here that are special CD4 T cells. And this is just some of the examples of some of the microscopy work that you can do when you're doing honours, and there's heaps of other things. But this is another one of my favorites. And so this is a very special video to me. I think it's very cool. And essentially it's a multi-photon video of sporozoites. So those little red squiggly banana shaped things are sporozoites in the skin. And these green wiggling dots are our special CD4 T cells. And what that actually means is that using the multi-photon, I could actually get a live mouse like under anesthetic right in front of me, inject in these sporozoites and basically start imaging in real time. And so Doherty is one of the few institutes in all of across Melbourne to actually have that multi-photon microscope. So in fact, I'm pretty sure we actually have two. So for me to be able to do that as an honours student, I mean, really no words can describe it. It's really quite incredible. And so these are just some of the things that I did throughout my honours years. And there is so much support around. I know that Scott was talking about sort of independence and really determining, you know, how much time you want to put in. But at the start, there is a lot of support in terms of learning new techniques and things like that. So a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun. I hope I've convinced you all to come do honours at Doherty. Honestly, you will not regret it. And yes, just to keep it quick, I guess, I'm going to pass it over to the next speaker, Hayley, who's going to be talking a bit about PhDs and things like that.
Great, thanks Rachel. That was super cool. I want to make some nice videos like that too. All right, so I am going to just take up a couple of minutes to talk about the yellow bit of this diagram that you saw earlier today. So one of my roles within the Department of Microbiology and Immunology and at the Doherty Institute is as the graduate research coordinator for our PhD students. And so I know a lot of you are probably just thinking about making it through semester 2 and what might happen next year. But just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the potential of studying at the Doherty Institute, I thought I'd show you some of the highlights of what PhD research at the Doherty can look like. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview, but there is actually also an information session specifically for PhDs within the School of Biomedical Sciences at the university that's happening next week. So if you are interested, you can attend that session specifically as well. So you've already heard a little bit about the number of projects, the number of labs, all the different fabulous research that's happening at the Doherty Institute. And I just want to say that if you look at that, the research projects link that Scott was talking about, a lot of those projects are also flexible enough that they can be available as PhD projects too. So if you are interested in a PhD, you can look at this site and consider these potential PhD projects as well. Although I must say that if you approach a supervisor because you're interested in their area of research, there's usually a lot more projects that are available and possible when you start to talk about your mutual interests. So PhDs at the Doherty are 3-year full-time degrees, entirely research-based. There's no coursework associated with this. One of the really cool things that happens within the Doherty Institute is the possibility of joint PhD degrees. And particularly in the immunology space, we have a fantastic joint PhD degree between the University of Bonn in Germany and the University of Melbourne, where students spend part of their PhD at each of the 2 institutes. And so I've given you a contact detail there in case you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. Applying for a PhD, much like honours and master's projects, it's really important to identify a supervisor, someone that you want to work with, particularly when you consider that you'll be working closely with them for several years. And we can help you out with that too. We can point you in the right direction. There are a bunch of requirements. You need to have H1 equivalence for entry, and then above that, being awarded scholarships actually takes into account your academic achievements and any experience that you've also had. And so one of the highlights, I think, for PhD students at the Doherty is the Doherty PhD program, of which I co-chair with Professor Dick Strugnell. This is sort of an add-on on top of your research program as part of your PhD, which involves basically all of the PhD candidates within the Doherty Institute and provides different professional development opportunities. So we run workshops all throughout the year on a range of different topics. I've listed a couple there, but there's quite a few more that we've run recently. And it's about developing skills that allow you to take your PhD knowledge into a range of different career opportunities and paths. So that's it from me. I just wanted to make sure that there were a few contact details and some websites that you could access in case you want any more information. definitely a world-class, wonderful place to do a PhD if you can. So I am now actually going to pass on to Simone, who actually is a postdoctoral fellow within our, within the Doherty Institute now, but did do her PhD and honours year within the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. So thanks, Simone.
Hi, thanks, Hayley. So yeah, I did my honours in the Doherty. I was the first year of honours that actually happened in the Doherty Institute back in 2014. So this is like quite a long time ago now. And so I started working with two different researchers, Laura McKay and Thomas Gebhardt, on a project that was looking at the biology of tissue resident memory T cells, which are a population of T cells that remain in peripheral tissues like the skin or the gut and the lung without recirculating in the blood. And so my research since that time has pretty much focused on these cells as well. So I finished honours in 2014. I found my honours experience to be really, really great. As Rachel was saying, it's a really great place to do honours, and especially the feel of having a cohort of people that are all moving through honours together and all working in the same building. I made a lot of friends that I am still really close friends with. I actually went overseas with those friends at the end of honours and had like a really great holiday in between starting my PhD. So you definitely get this vibe that everybody is really supportive and helping each other through their honours year. And you also get to learn a lot about whether research is something that you're interested in. When I started honours, I didn't know if I was going to do a PhD. I thought that I might want to do medicine. And so I sat the GAMSAT and did all of that jazz. But at the end of honours, I'd really enjoyed my honours year so much and really enjoyed working in the department a lot. And so I decided that I wanted to undertake a PhD and not do medicine. So I started doing a PhD with the same two supervisors that I did my honours with, except looking at tissue resident memory T cells in a different setting. So during my honours, I was looking in the thymus. And during my PhD, I started to look at the role that those cells might play in protecting against cancer, in particular melanoma. And so I found my PhD experience to be really good. I loved my PhD. I liked working with my supervisors. I had maybe like two different projects during my PhD. So one was looking at infection a bit more and one was looking at cancer, but most of the time I was focusing on the cancer project. And so during my PhD, we basically developed a new model where we could look at melanoma development within the skin using a mouse model. And what we showed was that tissue resident memory T cells are really important to protect against cancer, and in particular to produce this sort of phenomenon that's called tumor immune equilibrium, where immune cells can stop the growth of cancer without completely eliminating them. So it was really good to be able to do this work in the Doherty because, as Rachel showed you before, we had 2-photon microscopy at our disposal. So we could use real-time imaging to look at the interactions between the cancer cells and the T cells in mice. And we also had a great like infrastructure, animal facilities, etc., to like do these sorts of experiments because it requires really good FACS facility, which we have here. It requires a really good animal facility that can sort of take on the capacity to do these big experiments that I needed to do. And it requires, yeah, great microscopy and also great input from people around the department. So I think that like doing your PhD in the Doherty is really great because you get to be exposed to a lot of great research that's very focused on infection and immunity, and you don't only have input from your own supervisors in your project, but also everybody that works in the building, other PIs, so other lab heads that are working on similar or even completely different topics will be giving input and feedback into your project, and at the end of the day, all of that helps to take it where it needs to go. So after my PhD, I had published 2 papers that came out of my PhD work and 1 paper that had come out of my honours work. And so luckily for me, both of the papers that came out of my PhD were also in pretty good journals. So in Nature and Nature Immunology. And so after my PhD, I stayed on for a little bit to do some postdoctoral research in the same lab. So I'm currently working with Laura McKay, still on tissue resident memory T cells, but in a slightly different project. And I love working in the Doherty. I will say, like, I think that the Doherty is a really great environment to work in, aside from science, also just for life. Like, I think that my lab members are almost like a second family for me. And I find that it's a really supportive environment on a social level as well as on a scientific level. So I think that it's a really great place to do your PhD. And I think that it's given me like a good foundation to be able to move on to the next thing, hopefully, if COVID allows that to happen at some point, any point, that would be nice. But yeah, next I'm going to be moving on to Philadelphia to start a postdoctoral position overseas, and then hopefully in the future can continue a career in research and in academic research later down the track. So I don't have my email address up, but you can find it if you just Google my name. So if you would like to chat or ask any questions after the session, I'm happy to answer any questions people might have about doing honours and then transitioning to a PhD at the Doherty and doing a PhD in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. But I highly recommend it. It was a really good place for me to do my PhD, and I wouldn't do it anywhere else.
Thanks, Simone.
No worries.
Simone was one of the fantastic undergraduate students. I remember her as a star student in virology, and she's done an amazing job. Her research is award-winning. She's one of our greatest graduates in recent times. So we're going to now hear from Rachel Pascoe. So I'll hand it over to Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Damien, for the handover. So my name is Rachel, and I'm the president of SPASM, which stands for the Special Postgraduate Association for Students of Immunology and Microbiology. SPASM is here as the student society for all students in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology and the Doherty Institute. All students are automatically considered members of SPASM, so there's no registration needed. Our hope is that SPASM can enhance and enrich your experience as an honours, master's or PhD student. We'd like to not only support your academic studies here, but also offer many social activities and events tailored towards supporting your well-being as a student. SPASM hosts a range of activities, as you can see here. One of our largest events is the Biennial Graduate Research Conference, which is held every 2 years for 2 days in a venue outside of Melbourne. This conference is run by students for students and is a great way for graduate researchers to present their project, get feedback, and meet fellow students, postdocs, and lab heads. We also run a thesis post-it note competition, and we're involved in the MDHS Graduate Research Conference this year, which, if you get the opportunity to attend, will be a great way to hear about the research from our current masters and PhD students. We also have a student Twitter, which is @doherty.students, where we encourage students to become involved in science communication, sharing their experiences as a student and their successes at conferences and in publishing. We also appreciate that whilst we love the research we do, we also need a chance to relax and have some fun. SPASM hosts many social events every year, including the themed annual trivia night, which last year was Hawaiian themed, and we also held a hula hoop competition at the same time. Other social nights we have hosted included a Mario Kart competition and a foosball competition. We have a foosball table permanently located in the Doherty Institute's tea room. So if you ever want to refresh your skills during a break at work, feel free to use it. SPASM also hosts the annual Scientific Olympics, which is a great way to see who can refill pipette tips the fastest and other very essential lab skills. We also help to coordinate the Inter-Institute boat cruise, which is a great way to meet people from neighbouring institutes. Another inter-institute activity is the Inter-Institute soccer competition. We've also hosted a few virtual social events in these COVID times, including a few online board games nights, and we've got a couple of trivia nights coming up. So SPASM's also here to work with the Doherty and the department to support student wellbeing. We run a mental health week, which is a week full of activities, speakers and sessions focused on a healthy lifestyle, both body and mind. We also organise resilience and wellbeing programs for students, hosting these at the Biennial Graduate Research Conference. So SPASM is here to make sure you have the best student experience, providing a great way to meet other students and to be involved in the fantastic events here at the Doherty. So I hope you've all found this evening really illuminating, and hopefully I'll see some of you around next year, and please don't be a stranger. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So it looks like I've become the MC. So we can bring everybody back if you want to come back online, everyone, because we've got just a short amount of time where we can take some questions. So we've got lots of questions on the Q&A coming through, and there's also, there was a hand up, but we're going to read them off the screen. So maybe Andrew, have you been surveying those? I've been answering and typing in some of them.
Some of them, yeah. I think a lot of these, probably Scott was almost like, in terms of grades for honours and masters, fit into a bell curve? Not really, to my knowledge. Well, I'm trying to work out how many people generally apply for honours in each year. I think Scott would have a better feel for that.
Yeah, I sort of answered that before.
Yeah.
So if I stick just to our department, as I said, we have in the range of 15 to 30 students come in most years, and mostly students, if they are looking for a project, they get it. So
quote a number of international students accepted into the PhD programs at University of Melbourne. There is, I think, a fixed number of international scholarships that the university have, but we actually have a whole lot of people come to University of Melbourne with their own scholarships or with other sorts of scholarships.
Usually enthusiasm to come is probably one of the defining things. So, students manage to find scholarships from various sources. And I think that we're not just talking about the Department of Microbiology and Immunology as a place to do these courses. Look more broadly, the master's programs with the Department of Health funded positions in MDU and Vidral, for example. So lots of opportunities in the Doherty building to do further graduate studies.
there's a couple of questions about mid-year entry for honours, and so unfortunately our department does not have a mid-year entry for honours. But for instance, if you graduate mid-year, you can wait until the next round of entry. That is possible. If you're desperate to get in mid-year, there's 1 or 2 departments that offer mid-year, such as biochem for a small number of projects, but it's not as common.
How will COVID impact an honours year?
Yeah.
Difficult question. We've tried to tailor it a lot and readjust things quite a bit this year. Scott's probably got the most.
Yeah, I think actually the students this year have obviously had a very tough time, but that said, we've tailored it so they've still had a lot of time in the lab, and they get the same experience for the most part of having a good component of research and do all the other skills and coursework. So they'll come out of it with exactly the same as they would have in other years. And obviously predicting what will happen next year is difficult, but we've now learned very well to do as much as we can online. So for anyone enrolling for next year, it'll be a relatively smooth process, whatever happens.
Question about that I think is a really interesting one about supervisors choosing students or students, is it WAM based? I think the match between student and supervisor is really important. I think Scott said, whatever you do, you need to talk to a supervisor. So, WAM is clearly important, but so is what the supervisor feels like. There's got to be a good match there. And I would urge you all to, if you're interested in a project or a project with somebody, talk to them.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If a supervisor, for instance, has 2 interested students, similar WAM, but there's just a better personal interaction, or there's one student has not spoken to a supervisor and one has, then it will be that one that will be chosen. So it's not a letter of the law on coming down to picking it based on a WAM. There's also the requirement for that interaction, and that both the student and the supervisor agrees to doing the project.
In terms of the application, so the students put their rank list in Sonia, and supervisors get the opportunity to rank applicants against projects as well. So that doesn't necessarily link to the WAM at all. So it depends on the the interaction as well as the WAM. So
Yeah. And someone asked if you need a scholarship for entry into honours. No, you do not need a scholarship. Although there are a small number of faculty scholarships for the top students.
There's a question about PhD scholarships, and maybe Hayley, did you want to talk about funding a PhD?
So, I mean, Scott alluded to it a little bit, that academically the PhD scholarship applications, depending on whether you've done honours or masters. So if you've done honours, they will take into account your achievements during honours and the third year of your undergraduate degree. And if you do a master's, your undergraduate doesn't come into it, so it's just your master's score. But the PhD applications also take into account other things. So if you've had prior research experience and published a paper, then that can give you an extra boost in that application process too. So it's a little bit more complicated and takes into account not just academic achievements, but experience and background.
There's also quite a few questions about alignment of study with programs. And so I think, you know, probably most students that come through either into honours have done undergraduate subjects in microbiology or immunology, but it's not a strict one-to-one. You don't have to do that. Like there could be, you could have done a biochemistry background and that might fit a given project better than a cellular immunology background, for example. So I think that again is about engaging with the supervisor and saying, does this fit work? And the same is true with PhD programs. You can clearly do PhDs in our department without having done honours in our department. So there's not that sort of, and that goes, the skills you learn in honours are sort of translatable and broad. And some of those, you know, we would encourage people actually at the end of honours to look around and see what they've learnt, where it can be used and maybe applied in different ways.
Yeah, for the honours coursework, we try to assume little direct knowledge in the field, and we teach from the bottom up so that if you haven't done a major in immunology or microbiology, then it's not a problem.
I love this question. What do you talk about on Zoom with a potential supervisor? I do know a person who used to be in the department who wouldn't talk to a student unless they'd read one of their papers, at least. That's a hard line, but that's, if you want to get in somebody's good books, have a look at what they've published and actually come prepared.
Quite a few questions, maybe Scott, you want to answer these about HEX fees for local students and availability of scholarships for honours.
Well, honours is still an undergraduate year, so it works in the same way that third year does, for instance, for local students and also for international students if they're enrolled and paying their fees. What was the question about scholarships? Sorry, Damien?
Are there any available scholarships? Which there are, right?
There are, yeah. There's a small number of scholarships offered by the faculty. The information is actually on the faculty and I think also on the Doherty page. It's roughly $5,000. It's for the top ranked by WAM students that have been enrolled for that year in honours. I don't know if there's a fixed number available, but it's purely ranked on WAM and need as well.
And maybe some comment about the number of Commonwealth supported places for masters.
Well, there's only a limited number. And so therefore, if you do wish to enroll in a master's course and you are unable to vie for one of those CSPs, then it will obviously be a full fee paying postgraduate course. That's something to keep in mind compared to honours, which is an undergraduate HEX-based course.
There's also a lot of concern about the calculation of WAMs with the current environment. I think the WAMs will be calculated more or less as they always will be, but I think what will happen, my guess is that this year will be sort of, you know, the scores will be looked at in a sort of, what you get for your exams will be looked at in a light that understands what everybody's gone through. So I don't expect the WAMs to be adversely impacted on average relative to other years from this year. But it's clear that, you know, you may not have quite, you're going to have different experience for sure coming in. But I think the point that somebody made, you know, I think most labs will basically take you as if you haven't done any prac work anyway and just train you in their own way of doing things, because that's, you know, you're almost starting again from when you go into honours. It's a sort of a new way of learning and a new practice. So I think that's what's exciting about it. You're not learning what's in a textbook. You're learning why we think what we do and the basis by which we know what we do. And you're learning the limitations about our knowledge. And you have to learn that from scratch.
We have a vast number of questions, so maybe someone here. What we do in the undergrad teaching course on webinar is we copy the questions and then we take them and answer them offline and then post them. So I'm not sure, Andrew, how long we want to run the question time, or if we want to do it, stick to the program or keep going.
We can keep on going for a little while longer and answer some of the questions. You're also welcome to send your question. You would have received, no doubt, a number of registration and associated reminder emails, and there's a Doherty PhD email address in those, so you're welcome to send emails to that address. That'll come through to me, and I'll do my best to ensure your question is answered by the appropriate person. And some of your questions will also be answered by looking at the Doherty website, which has links back to the microbiology and immunology websites.
A few people asking about work experience. It's probably not quite the forum to deal with that. It's difficult to get work experience and to manage that from a
well, training and safety view.
Yeah, from like it's a high containment, high safety area. It's not unheard of, you know. And again, if I was going to give you advice, it would be to be proactive and engage with the PIs, the lab heads. That's the way that would happen. We don't have a formalized program, and you know, if you show sufficient interest, as opposed to simply harassment, that's probably the pathway to developing a longer term relationship with a lab. And some labs are actually looking for that, and they will find part-time work even for you. But it does require some initiative.
Yeah, there's an interesting question here about when applying for an honours project, are you viewed as a participant in the project, or do you have really an independent running and choosing a part of the project you want to focus on? So maybe either Rachel or Simone, one of the Rachels, would be well placed to address that.
So I can give it a go, but I remember with my honours project, sort of you start off with a base project that your supervisor has sort of got the scaffolding for and the foundation already there for. And then as you go along, obviously with all things science, things might not necessarily go as you've expected. And that can sort of just go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. But I think that's all part of the process because you actually get very invested in it. And so when things don't go very well, you work with your supervisor, at least I did, to try and work out, okay, well then what's our next step? Like what type of experiments can we plan around to help us either work around this or continue chasing sort of answers down this route? So I think you can be proactive and you can be very, very involved with your project. And in that sense, you can direct it in certain areas, but overall, it's generally still in the same realm of what you originally had.
I would say it's competency-based training. You know, if you're competent and you're doing the project well, you know, the supervisor will offer you more and more. It opens up to you and you take ownership of it. mean, certainly Simone in her honours year, it was a brilliant year. I think that's a great example of grabbing hold of a project and, smashing it out of the park with outstanding results and a career built around what you do in that initial step.
It also is a bit about the project. So you are doing what's called research. And most times it's real research, which means you don't know what's going to happen. And that maybe the project doesn't go anywhere. And so you're doing a workaround about this is not working out how I planned. And so you may not have the breadth as a student to work out how to manage that, but that's why you're part of a team. And again, what we're really keen on is even when the project is not perhaps generating amazing results, what the aim of an honours year is actually to train you in research. How to think about a problem, how to approach it, how to make sure that what you're doing is controlled and you can actually draw defined conclusions rather than running down rabbit holes in vague, wishy-washy ways. So, and I've seen students with projects that absolutely haven't worked, but in terms of conception, they have done exceptionally well because they have actually approached the issues in a systematic, thorough way, excluded things as problems, and then made progress.
And perhaps just to cover some of the key points with the selection process, just looking at some of the questions, particularly around work experience. So I think in terms of the honours and the masters, with the minimum requirement being 65, but is generally higher than that, particularly for honours, and clearly the communication with the supervisor is key. But in terms of work experience, I don't think, Damon and Scott, that's really factored in and certainly not required.
Not required, no, and not officially factored in any way, no.
But I think it's fair to say that it's very beneficial. I mean, if you're coming and you want to get into a research training program, I think one of the questions there, somebody sounds like they've got any amount of technical capability is advantageous towards getting on and learning about applying those skills towards scientific method, which is what Andrew was talking about, which is the real crux of the learning within an honours program. Learning how to conduct a project with rigorous science, analysing data in a rigorous scientific manner, writing it up and presenting it in a thesis.
And I mean, obviously that's an important part of reaching out to the potential supervisor, is you can then communicate to them that you've got that work experience and you have those interests. And so therefore that makes a big difference in potentially finding the right project for you. And there were a couple more questions about what to do. And I'll reiterate that the best thing to do really is to reach out to a supervisor if you're interested in a project and send them your CV, send them your transcript, tell them why you like their research and that project, what interests you personally. And then suggest that if they're interested in your background and your interests, then you can Zoom in to chat about the project further. That's the best way to start the process.
And just to cover off on the entry requirements for course and scholarship for the PhD, again, work experience is certainly not required for entry to the PhD, although given some students do, for example, complete honours or masters and they might work in a lab for a year or two and then think about doing a PhD, having had that documented work experience, that can enhance your scholarship score by a modest amount, but it still can enhance it. But I mean, Haley, you might want to talk about this in terms of work experience and to the degree which that's considered by potential supervisors.
I mean, I think you covered it, Andrew. It does add a little bit towards your prospects of receiving a scholarship, but it is looked upon by supervisors very favourably if you're coming into a PhD with appropriate or relevant research experience. Rachel, do you want to talk at all about that? Because, I mean, you did a master's and have had a bit of work experience and are now doing a PhD.
I did. I did a master's of biomedical science, and I wasn't too sure where I wanted to go. And I actually worked as a research assistant in Sharon Lewin's lab for 2 years before I decided that I really wanted to enter into a PhD in the same lab. And I don't think it disadvantages you at all. In fact, I would say in some ways it gives you an advantage. You become a little more competent and comfortable in the lab, and you get, at least I found, I get a little more independence in some ways. You're also more normalized to a lab culture. So definitely don't feel discouraged if you don't go straight into a PhD.
Yeah.
I think we've answered the questions we can in the time available. Appreciate that we are at the 6:30 mark. So I'll just, in the chat function, so you would have seen it before in the slides, but if you go to that link for further information, particularly about research projects, it is brand new and it's 2021 specific, so have a look at that. Some of you might have seen the projects that were listed for this year, but we do now have 2021 updated information. This is being recorded, and once we have the recording up on the Doherty website, we will send you an email, and that's an opportunity to ask further questions as well. So I think with that all being said, I'd clearly like to thank the presenters and our student graduate representatives, and thank everyone in the audience for attending. We hope it's been useful, and we're happy to keep on discussing and communicating with you through the various forums. And all the best if you are currently completing this semester. And we hope to see a number of you at the Doherty over the next few years. Thank you very much, and good night.